Sir, we have talked about this consciousness unit and material unit, two parts, two types of units are there, consciousness and material. Then in consciousness, it looks like that life is there, that part means human beings and animals are there. But it seems to me that in plants also life, a sort of life is there in plants also. So in that sense, this life and consciousness both are different or both are same? Or should we conclude that life is there only in these two orders and not in that two orders, or the initial two orders?
Yeah. In fact, this notion of life, and the notion of consciousness seems to be quite unclear. If you look at our whole education system, we will find that the notion of life and the notion of consciousness are not very clear. We generally tend to assume the two to be same, right. Now, if you look at what we have talked about here, we can clearly demarcate between what is life and what is consciousness. So, what we said was that if you look at this pranic order, so if you look at the cells, the plants, the trees, the animal body, the human body, right, they are characterized by growth, right. So, if you look at this pranic order, it is characterized by growth, right. But there is no self, there is no consciousness associated with it. So, if you look at a plant, for example, it will take birth, that is it will germinate, it will grow and it will die, right, and its inheritance is based on seed. So, seed will help it to continue its tradition. So, seed will germinate into a plant, the plant will grow and it will die, and in the process the plant will generate seeds and then the tradition will continue, right. Today when you say life, you generally mean growth, right. But now you can be clear that when you are talking about life, as growth, then we are talking about the pranic order, which means you are talking about the plants, the trees, the cells, the animal body and the human body. Okay. But this is not consciousness. Okay. So, if you look at this that we were just discussing, this is the pranic order starting with cells, then plants and trees, all this is pranic order, and we generally consider this to be life. Okay. So, this is not consciousness, okay. This is talking about pranic order or bio order, which is characterized by respiration, which is characterized by growth, right. That is what we are talking about. And because in our assumption today we think that human being is equal to body, then therefore we study about the body, and on the basis of that we conclude that all these three things have life, the trees, the animals, the human being. But this is talking about the body of the animal and the body of the human being along with the plants and trees. So, that is generally understood to be life. When you look at the consciousness, right, it has to do with this knowing and assuming, right, and then recognizing and fulfilling on the basis of this knowing and assuming. So, this knowing and assuming which is in addition to what we see in the material world. Okay. So, when you say consciousness, it has to do with knowing, assuming and then recognizing, fulfilling on the basis of assuming, knowing, right. So, if you look at the consciousness, the recognition and fulfillment of the consciousness is based on assuming or based on knowing and assuming. And that is why when you talk about consciousness, you have this possibility of indefiniteness of the conduct, which is not there in case of plants and trees. So, if you look at human being now, human being is coexistence of self and body, right, and therefore, the conduct of human being depends upon the conduct of the self, which depends upon the knowing and assuming, right. Therefore, if assuming keeps changing, recognition and fulfillment keeps changing, therefore, the conduct is indefinite, which is not there in case of plants and trees. Similarly, when knowing takes place, the assuming becomes definite, recognition and fulfillment becomes definite, therefore, conduct becomes definite. So, all this has to do with the consciousness, the self, right, and self has to do with knowing and assuming over and above recognizing and fulfilling. So, this growth, the life what we call generally is characterized by growth and respiration, which is true for case of plant, true for animal body, true for human body. But when you talk about consciousness, it is characterized by knowing and assuming. Okay. And when there is knowing and assuming, okay, taking place, and if the assumptions are not based on knowing, then you will see variation in knowing, assuming, and therefore, variation in the conduct. So, you will see variation in the conduct of human being, but you will not see variation in the conduct of a plant, a tree, right. A neem tree will always behave in a particular manner, the mango tree will always behave in a particular manner, right, or will respond in a particular manner, but the human being will will respond differently or may respond differently. And similarly, if you look at the animals, in their own right, they have presumed themselves to be an body, and there their conduct is definite. But if an animal comes in contact with human being, like your pet animals, you can see the variation in their conduct, because then the role of assuming has become more kind of significant and is getting influenced by the association of human being. Yeah. So, same dog, right, which is a pet for you, will respond differently to you and respond differently to somebody outside. Yeah. So, life and consciousness are two different things, as the life as it is understood today. Life is associated with growth and respiration. The consciousness or self is associated with knowing, assuming, recognizing and fulfilling. So, it is knowing and assuming which differentiates this consciousness from what is normally called as life today. But human being of course has this human body, which is characterized by respiration and growth. But in our study today, what we are studying in the name of education today, we go by the presumption that whole existence is the physical world, right, a material world, and therefore, human being is also the body, which is a material world. So, if you are only studying the body, then the human body, the animal body, the plants and trees, they will all look similar, right, and that is what we are characterizing as life. So, we are not talking about consciousness at all, which is going to play the central role in case of human being. Yeah. That is one of the major backdraw of education today, right. The very content of education today does not include the study of consciousness, and this not studying the consciousness may be okay in case of physical world, pranic order, and even for animal order, because the role of self has not become all that significant. But when it comes to human being, yes, the role of self becomes the most important. Self comes to the center to human existence, and therefore, unless you understand the self, unless you understand the consciousness, it is not possible to understand human being, the conduct of human being, and how human being has to perform.